What is good, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video, and in this one I want to break down what's going on with Tesla, SPY, Nvda, the QQQ, and a couple of other tickers. Break down what's happening with the economic calendar for today and some important levels to be watching for, and how the charts are looking in my honest opinion, given all this data and all this news that just came out. But before I break into these all this information, before I get into any more details, let me just mention a couple of things. Firstly, I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Moomoo link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Moomoo, the link down below, and deposit $100 into the account, you are guaranteed 5 free stocks. If you deposit $1,000, you're guaranteed up to 15 free stocks, and this offer is very soon, in just a couple of weeks. Anyways, when it comes to SPY, ever since we haven't opened up, but ever since the pre-market started, essentially, SPY has been downtrending more and more and more, and so far has failed to get any sort of meaningful bounce. So there's a risk of this thing dropping lower looking at the current technicals. But I first want to break down some news before I talk about these levels to watch for and what SPY may do in my honest opinion. So when it comes to news, I just want to say that today is Monday, March 11th, and make sure you're prepared for this because we first and foremost have the New York Fed Treasury purchases coming out at 10:30 a.m. Might not really affect us that much. The most important hour is going to be at 11 o'clock a.m. However, because we have consumer inflationary expectations, and then at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we have the 3-month and 6-month bill auctions coming out. We have the 3-year notes auction at 1 p.m. But I would say the most important time to watch for volatility is going to be 11 o'clock a.m. Watch and see what happens around this hour. Do we start to see any changes? But that's pretty much it. Now, all this data is going to be very minor in preparation for CPI, which is going to be on Tuesday. So make sure you're prepared for all of this. Now, when it comes to earnings that just came out, we had Ballard, not to mention LTech and a few others. And later on, we have Oracle announcing their earnings later on for today. Throughout the week, we have Kohl's and more retail stocks announcing their earnings. Just as a reminder for Ballard, the share price is kind of flat right now. We actually have their financial metrics right over here. For the Q4, revenues at about 46 million, up 132%. Even their stationary revenue is up quite good, and overall earnings were looking pretty decent. Overall, however, their guidance was so-so, not really too strong, not too weak, and the share price is flat, so not bad from them. It was just so-so. Now, LTech, excuse me, they're not in the best of place. However, we actually saw the share price drop amidst their earnings report, and that's because of the fact that despite having decent revenue, their EPS was not necessarily the best. EPS was actually a miss by 9 cents, worse than estimated, and revenue came in barely aligned with expectations. But their overall outlook is not the strongest, it's just so-so. But because they missed on earnings, the share price is starting to drop pretty hard, and this made a big move to the downside. All right, so that's it for earnings so far. Like I said before, most of the earnings are kind of minor for the time being. I'll be talking a little bit later about Oracle as time goes on. Now, a couple of things to know about the market is the fact that the market is on a break right now. We're starting to see the Dow following this trend, falling 0.9% in the worst week since October. The S&P 500 slid, so did the Nasdaq, and we're still continuing this trend. Despite this, Bitcoin rose to a record $71,000. That's once again very, very awesome for them as the UK opened the door for trading. This is very interesting, and we'll see how this continues. But just be careful as we approach April because big changes will be coming. President Joe Biden is leading into tax hikes on corporations and wealthy, according to these reports. That could have a big effect. So the election is going to have a big effect on us nonetheless. And we'll see if any other updates come from that. Social media platform Reddit wants to raise as much as $748 million in its IPO, expecting in the coming months. So that's going to be very important according to a new filing. And finally, Oppenheimer was the big winner of the 96th Academy Award. So that's very, very good for Universal and the companies involved. Great news for them. Anyways, nothing too crazy has been coming out for the news besides CPI for tomorrow. So let's now talk about the charts. All right, so now that you have the context about what's happening in the market, right? We have CPI for tomorrow. What do I see on SPY? Here's the simple answer. We're going to be testing our 50 EMA at 509.43. Now, this is going to be our support. If we lose this support, I could see this thing coming all the way down towards 508.5, if not 507. It will be coming next, 507.5. So, in my personal opinion, I'm going to be watching this support. I do want to note that there is a risk of this coming down lower. It's been selling off for the most part, continuing to downtrend. We're at a support right now, but there is a risk of it coming all the way down towards, in my opinion, 508 flat. It could even hit 507.5. I have a feeling it's going to come a little bit lower since we've been just continuing to sell off, looking very, very weak. So watch that 507 support and see if we hold around here and get a bounce. If we lose 507, then we could come all the way down to the 505s. If we lose 507 flat, I mean, then 505 is a possibility. But honestly, guys, I think that for now we're just going to be watching to see if we end up approaching that 507 area. So we'll see how it goes. When we open, we may pop a little bit and continue lower, but there is a risk of this coming down. Just watch confirmation. Watch to see if we lose our 50 EMA for the time being. And if we get a temporary break below it before we try to get bought back up later. So there's a risk of us coming back down to lower levels, but then we may get a bounce later on off that 507 area. So watch that very, very carefully. Onto the QQQ, I'm seeing something very similar developing. The QQQ is also continuing to essentially downtrend right over here. As you can see right here, it's just been dropping lower and lower and lower, and it's not looking that great. Looking at this trend, we're actually very close. We just tagged our price target from yesterday at that 436 area, so it's still looking relatively weak, and there is a risk of this just continuing to fall. Now, one thing we could do is kind of just adjust this a little bit. We can even draw our wedge like this. It doesn't really matter how we draw this. Either way, I just see the same trend developing. But basically, in a nutshell, I do anticipate more downside for this. So look for a little rebound, could retest 437, then continue lower, and we could come all the way down to 434. Actually, this is where we had the support right here. If we lose 436, so we'll see how well the QQQ holds that. But I do think there's a very good chance we kind of pop to 437, then come back down all the way down to about 434. There's a risk of that on the QQQ. Looking at this, we have this gap to fill too, so be very, very careful on the triple Q. Now, how about for Tesla? With the risk of the QQQ and SPY selling off a little bit more, how could this affect Tesla? Well, honestly, guys, Tesla had bullish news that came out involving the Giga Berlin. It could be opening sooner than expected. And we are seeing some positive remarks from analysts, but the truth is Tesla's still looking kind of weak. We have to try to break 177.6 to turn a little bit more bullish, to try to push it a little higher. And if we end up losing 175, we're going to be sinking down to 173.75, then 172, and eventually 170 to 168. So I think that there is a risk of this kind of like popping and coming down just a bit back down to 175, if not to lower levels. So you want to be very careful when looking at Tesla. You could interpret this as kind of like an inverse like structure, and Tesla could make an attempt to break. But like I said before, my concern about Tesla is the fact that SPY and the QQQ might underperform. So there might be some weight on Tesla, it might not push as hard as it could. So it might kind of like pop a bit, then kind of slow down as time goes on, drop a little bit, then start to consolidate. I do think there's a risk of that. And I say this because of how the market may drag it and the fact that despite bullish news coming out, Tesla's only up about 40 cents in the pre-market. So there's a risk of it actually coming down lower. Might pop first and come back down lower towards that 172 area, then it consolidates a little bit, and then we'll see a bigger move later on. We also got reject off for 20 EMA the last time we touched it, so it's not looking that great. Finally, for Nvda, Nvda is also not looking perfect right now because you could see as Nvidia was selling off, we got this big sell off. We made an attempt to rebound at that 900 area. We did say that Nvidia might rebound a bit before it rejects. And this is similar to what happened right over here. We actually hit 900. We got another rejection. We're barely holding 862. Watch resistance at 878. Watch support at 862, followed by 850. And if we lose that, a bigger drop could be coming all the way down towards 844. So I do think there's a risk of that on Nvidia. We might just see this thing kind of pop and come back down a little bit more towards 850, then consolidate for a bit and eventually make our way down lower. So we're going to be looking for a little bit more downside. And by dictionary definition, this is starting to downtrend right now. We made a lower high and we got this big rejection. A lower high is made. Nvidia does look a little bit more bearish. So it might kind of pop a bit, then make its way down to 850. And if that fails, there's 844 and 834 as supports. So I think there is a risk of Nvidia essentially coming down. So be very, very careful and just know the risks on it. And then last but not least, we have Aapl stock. Aapl, in my opinion, is looking not the best. So the thing I want to say about Aapl is that we're still on a downtrend. Even though this thing is trying to rebound a bit, there is this downtrend right here. But as we said yesterday, it might retest this yellow trend line. So I think that Aapl might try to outperform the market because finally it's trying to show some life. And we did bounce off this 170 area quite nicely. So it's trying to push higher. We'll be watching resistance at 172.5. It may make an attempt to get there, but watch and see if we get a rejection off the yellow trend line. If we break past this, it could push higher, but if we reject off this, it's going to come back down. But I do think Apple's going to push a little higher, and we'll see how it reacts to that trend line. If we do break past the trend line, we break past 172.5, there's a gap to fill up to 174, so it could be making its way back up. But watch for confirmation, watch and see what the chart does. So with that being said, guys, the market does have a risk of more downside, but make sure you watch and see how well SPY ends up holding at its support. We'll have to see how well the market reacts, and then we'll see what happens from here. But I just want to warn you all to be very, very careful. We'll see how it goes. So watch your levels, and I'll see you guys very soon in just a couple of hours. Thank you for listening, and peace out.